overcomers have to overcome even the elements out there. But he said, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in Jesus' name, there will Jesus be. And we've got practically the whole church here when everyone else is holed up somewhere inside. We sure didn't have to put up with this down in Mississippi. Church is never closed down there. I guess that's more of a curse than a blessing, though. We seem like we have 1 or 2 of these. We're blessed with 1 or 2 of these a year around here. Hallelujah. Well, those of you that are here, I assume most everyone's here. We're back on the conclusion to our studies here in creation and the flood. We're in our final section dealing with chronology. And here in this final section, last week we've looked at patriarchal longevity. Not that it really deals a whole lot with this final question that we're going to begin looking at tonight, but those chapters will certainly tie in. Pretty much the only hope we have if we're going to stay with the Bible to find something that is said in the Bible about ages and dates and things like this. But we looked at that because of so much unbelief in the area of the validity of these dates of these patriarchs, almost 1,000 years old. We looked at the various theories. None of them made any sense at all. At least that I could tell, none of them made any sense. You want to make Enoch 5 years old when he has a son and, do a lot of silly things to get away from the fact that people live 9 centuries. So tonight we come to our final great question that we have to raise, spend a lot of time looking in and around, and then end up answering over the next few months. And that is, just how old is our planet and its inhabitants? This will take up the rest of our time by looking at various things that fall under this heading, this question. Just how old is our planet and its inhabitants? Everyone has a view. Christians have their views, plural, if you'll notice. Scientists generally have their view, singular. They're more united than Christians in what they feel that the age of the earth is. We're going to be looking tonight at the latter of those 2 groups of people and what some of their views are concerning the age of the earth, or really what some of their beliefs are concerning the generally accepted view of the age of the earth. And that standard age you can put somewhere around the 5 billion mark. Most scientists will concur in the belief that the earth is somewhere around 5 billion years old, which puts it back during what they themselves, geologists, call the Precambrian period. Man has not been around anywhere near that long. They generally date the arrival, beginning of man, at somewhere between 1 and 2 million years during the Quaternary period, or the Cenozoic era. Now, our contention is that not only are these fancy names the pure inventions of men, but so are all the theories that they put under these fancy names. If you look at your geologic timetable in the book that hopefully most of you have completed for the first, maybe the second time, you'll find that they've got a whole system of the Earth's history broken down under different periods: Paleozoic, Mesozoic, Cenozoic, Cambrian, Precambrian period, or eras. Really, eras. Precambrian is a period, but the others are eras. And then you have various periods under the eras, and then under that you have when sponges first came along, all the way up to when dinosaurs came along, and everything in between, a sponge and a brontosaurus. And they put this 10 million or 100 million or 1 million or 3.5 billion. I mean, you got a long time to fit things in between now and 5 billion years ago. And all of these fancy titles that go with them, they all mean something as far as breaking it down and finding out, now, what actually does the word Cenozoic mean? They all mean something. But when you look under these names and find out what their beliefs are under them, those beliefs really don't mean anything. They are purely the inventions of the degenerate minds of fallen men. And although most Christians won't say something as strong as that, that pretty much is where we have to leave it, that man is trying to get away from in the beginning God. As long as he can get something or someone else involved, he wants to keep clear of the biblical record in the beginning God. The facts of theology, however, John, for instance, chapter 1, verses 1 to 2, inform us that in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, all things were made by Him. Amen. And without Him was not anything made that was made. It couldn't be made if it wasn't made by our Maker, in other words. Amen. But they don't like things like that. Some Christians try to reconcile the facts of science with the facts of Scripture by saying, well, sure, God made things, but He made just it in its essence and then let it evolve on into something a little more progressed down the line. But the Scriptures don't hold for this at all. If you'll remember, in Hebrews chapter 11, we're informed that this whole area that we've been looking at is a matter of faith. Hebrews 11 and verse 3. You need to keep this in mind, although we do look at various ways to disprove what scientists are saying. When it comes right down to it, I mean, if you get out there and you forget all these statistics, we're going to give you some more of them tonight, so just bear with us again. If you get out there and forget all these statistics, it really doesn't make any difference because it's a matter of faith anyway. You could have all the statistics to prove that the earth is not 5 billion years old, but statistics won't last. Verse 3. Through faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the Word of God. That's Genesis 1, that's John 1. All things that are made were made by the Maker. And without Him was not anything made that was made. And besides that, even common scientific human everyday normal experience inform us that nothing plus nothing equals nothing. Amen. And I don't know how they're getting around that. I mean, I, in a quintillion of years, could possibly conceive of how a lightning bolt that struck a protozoa in a swamp evolved into a man. But from where did the swamp, the protozoa, and the lightning bolt come? Amen. Maybe over a quintillion years I could grasp that evolution is true. But from where did those three things come? Nothing plus nothing is nothing. And they can just keep working back and working back and working back and getting back to a one-cell protozoa or amoeba, and it started everything, but from where did it come? Amen. Nothing plus nothing equals nothing. And so they invent spontaneous generation. That's the same as Hebrews 11:3, creation by the Word of God. You had nothing, and all of a sudden you had something. But without an outside force, we know that to be impossible. I mean, life and its common existence shows us that that is impossible. You can't have nothing and all of a sudden have something after that. Nothing, if you add nothing to it, you still get nothing. Amen. And if you have nothing, how can you add something to it? I mean, by definition, if you have nothing, there's nothing to add to nothing. So how can you start with nothing and end up with something? And some will say that matter is eternal, but very few people really believe that because we live in a world where we see nothing but a birth, a process, and a death experience. Everything has a beginning. Whether it's man-made, God-made, everything has a beginning, it has a continuance, and it always has an end. Yeah. It's beyond our finite mind and understanding to conceive of matter being eternally present. That simply is not possible. Now, we're not getting into the area of God being eternally present. He's not matter. But matter, just because of what matter is, cannot be eternally present. It had to have a beginning somewhere. And they want to make the beginning of the world 5 billion years ago, but it began whenever the sun exploded. So from where did the sun come? And it began when something else contracted and got too hot and got too cold and it burst. Well, then from where did it come? It's really neat, how they just keep everyone running from page to page, trying to find out, well, let's get back to the very, very beginning. And when you get back there, then you're back to the Bible, in the beginning God. Amen. But they don't take us to the beginning. Oh, it's the beginning of the earth. But then, what started the earth? Well, the sun. Well, take us to the beginning of the sun. Well, what started that? Well, this. Well, take us to the beginning of that. And they keep you so tied up that pretty soon, when you read a book that's too long, you just pretty soon put it down and never read the conclusion. Because it takes you so long, you think, well, my word, I'm tired of running from one thing to another. I'm going to stop before I get through. Most people never get through a big book, maybe 1,500 pages. They'll read about 500, and they just can't wade through it. And that's good, because at the end of the book, they tell you, after all, we don't know what we're talking about. That's a footnote on the last page. All of this is dubious guessing and a lot of guesswork involved. We think that this could possibly have been what happened, but after all, we're only men. We don't know. No one lived then. This is our theory. But you see, no one ever gets to the back of the book. And they read all through the first part of it where these theories sound so logical and so reasonable. And you think, well, I can understand 5 billion years ago as long as I can understand from where the earth came. And so the next chapter is entitled, From Where Did the Earth Come? And so you go right into that. And pretty soon you get tired of trying to trace it back to the beginning. And as I said, it is simply the attempt of the degenerate minds of fallen men to get away from the fact that the Bible says, in the beginning God. Without that, we really have no hope of finding out what the beginning was like. So I want to come to some of the reasons that are used by the scientists for their belief that the earth is around 5 billion years old, both astronomic and geologic in nature. Chronometers, these are theories by which they try to gauge the age of the earth, the age of man, the age of the various inhabitants and denizens of this planet. So to begin with, some of these we've already looked at, so we'll just be passing over them, but some other ones we haven't. I've got about 10 or so that are arguments from the scientific point of view and from the scientific reference for the fact that the earth can't be a recent creation or a recent product of evolution. It has to be on the order of 5 billion years old. To begin with, we can start off with their theory concerning the light from stars, especially stars that are in other galaxies. Other solar systems aren't as bad as stars that are in other galaxies. That can be proven by astronomy to actually be that far away. Take, for instance, Andromeda, our nearest galaxy to the Milky Way, is somewhere on the average of 2 million light years away, which means that it takes 2 million years for the light from the stars of the galaxy of Andromeda to go from Andromeda to the Milky Way. And since we can see Andromeda, then it has to mean that the light has been traveling from Andromeda for 2 million years. Since light travels at 186,000 miles a second and it's 2 million light years from us, then for the past 2 million years, light, not before that, but for at least the past 2 million years, light has been traveling at 186,000 miles per second from Andromeda in order to get to us. Now, that is very reasonable, and really, I guess there's probably not many people who would find any fault with that, because how are you going to get? You can't just pack up light in a bag and take it from one galaxy to another. It has to travel there. And it has to travel, it can't travel any faster, any slower than 186,000 miles a second. And so it's going to take, you divide the seconds into that and find out how far it is, and therefore find out how long it took for the light to get there. If you remember, our answer to this was that God created the light from the stars already visible to people here on the planet. Some of these we've already looked at. Which means that as soon as Adam was created, remember the stars came the fourth day, he came the sixth day, then it only took 2 days, or we don't even know that it took 2 days. We just know that 2 days after these vast galaxies and these vast solar systems and these vast planets and suns and stars and all of the reaches of the universe, 2 days after they were created, they were visible by Adam here on this planet. It didn't take 2 million years for the light to get here, because the light was created already to be here. The argument with that is that God is practicing deception on us, because he's making us think that these galaxies have been here for 2 million years. I mean, look what all the scientists think. That's exactly what happens. They all think that. But he's not the one making us think that. As a matter of fact, he tells us right in the Word around how old the earth is, and he tells us how the starlight gets here, that it was made already here, so he's not trying to deceive anyone. Men are deceived because they don't study the Word of God. That's always true. In every area, men are deceived because they don't study, and therefore they don't know what the Word of God teaches. If they did, then all of their problems and all of their questions would be solved and answered for them, but this they choose not to do. Then in the second place, they argue on the basis of the salt content in the oceans. We're not going to spend time on ones we've looked at. Light from stars, Genesis 1. If you don't like that answer to it, then try to think up one yourself. How does light from that far away get here? Since we know it can't travel any faster than 186,000 miles a second, and if it's 2 million light years away, it's going to take 2 millions for light to get here. You see, a light year is the distance that light travels in 1 year, traveling at 186,000 miles a second. Then how does it get here? Well, there's really no answer unless you're going to put the Earth at 5 billion years old and the other parts of the universe at 10 billion years old and so forth. So the salt content in the oceans, they tell us the oceans are far too salty to be a recent creation, on the average of, let's say, under 100,000 years. The answer to that is the flood. There was so much runoff, unparalleled amount of runoff after the flood, that it did drastically increase the salt content of the oceans. You see, we know that from one decade to the next decade, the oceans really don't become any saltier. I mean, it's so small you can hardly measure it. And remember, the salt content is raised by runoff of lands, runoff water into the rivers, into streams that empty into gulfs, seas, oceans, and so forth. We know that it's a very, very slow process. But yet they're so salty, if you've ever been to the oceans and had a little drink, accidentally, of course, of the water, you realize just how salty it was. I remember when we were in the Gulf of Mexico, when you go under and come up and get a big mouthful of that water, and it is just horrible tasting. I mean, it's not even something you can drink when you're dying of thirst, because it'll kill you if you drink too much of it. And you know that's salty water. That's very salty, and it didn't get that way in 100,000 years, so they tell us, because the runoff is not great enough to put that much of the topsoil and that much of the various parts of the Earth's surface back into the oceans, which will raise the salt content. But when you go back to the flood, if it's universal, see, you got to believe in a universal flood, or it's still the flood doesn't help you at all. If it's universal, then it certainly can raise the salt content very quickly over a very small span of time. In the third place, another argument. All of these are arguments they use for the age of the Earth. The mountain chains that are present in the world. Depending on which of the couple of mountain building theories we gave you earlier these people believe, the mountains are formed over a process of time, convection currents, buckling of the crust of the earth, upthrust of level ground, upthrust of ground that perhaps is a little higher than other ground around it. Then one sign by which you can tell how old that mountain chain is does it have rugged peaks on top of it? I think we gave you the example earlier. The Rocky Mountains would have to be fairly new. I mean, it's still millions of years, but fairly new because of all the jagged peaks. But the Appalachian chain in the eastern United States would be entirely different, because there you have kind of rolling mountains, no jagged peaks on them. Therefore, they would have to be a new arrival. In the fourth place, by the way, our answer to that, remember, was a passage over in the book of Psalms where we find out that the mountains rose up supernaturally after the flood. In the fourth place, Ice Age remains. This concerns a whole variety of topics, such as the indentions found in solid rock in places like the country of Canada, where you can tell great ice sheets have slid across the continental surface and shelf of various continents throughout the world today, especially in the northern hemisphere. All of the, well, things like the woolly mammoth, these type of creatures, they would say lived millions of years ago, because the Ice Age is what came and destroyed them, and since the Ice Age was millions of years ago, it would have to put them millions of years ago. Do you remember what our answer was there? You should remember pretty much all of these, at least the essence of the answer. We explained how the temperature in the atmosphere changed so drastically during the flood as well as after the flood. It was a little unstable after the flood. It took a while for equilibrium, remember, to set in. And this is what caused not only the death of things like the woolly mammoths and palm trees down in the South Pole and Antarctica and stuff like that, as well as these Ice Age remains, and of course some of which are true. There weren't multiple Ice Ages. There was only one Ice Age, but it can all be explained on the basis of the flood. Then in the fifth place, features in the geologic realm, such as the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon is 5,000 feet deep, 25,000 feet across. That's a mile deep, over 4 miles wide, and extends for over 100 miles. Now, if you've never been to the Grand Canyon, I have been there. When you say something is a mile across, a canyon is a mile or almost 4 miles, over 4 miles, a mile deep, over 4 miles across, it's pretty hard to really picture in your mind how wide of a canyon that is. And way down at the very bottom of it, a mile down there, is the little bitty tiny Colorado River. Not anywhere near as big as the Big Muddy or the Amazon or the Nile or Tigris or Euphrates, little bitty Colorado River that supposedly over millions and millions of years has cut the Grand Canyon. Problem with that is, why is that the only Grand Canyon in the whole world? I mean, surely the Nile has been there as long as the Colorado River has. Tigris, Euphrates have probably been there as long, if not longer, than Colorado River. And Colorado River's cutting all that right through rock. Right through, that's part of the Rocky Mountains in there. Tigris, Euphrates River, that's swampland there. You ought to be able to cut pretty deep, pretty fast there. But yet, we don't have any canyons like the Grand Canyon anywhere else in the world. So why only one? In other words, what you're saying is at one time the earth only had one river. That's what you're saying then. Because if you had any more than that, and they had been here as long as the Colorado River, then they would have cut some type of canyon, at least a half a mile deep, but there's no place like the Grand Canyon on the whole planet. And such a small river like the Colorado River. Well, again, the answer to that is the flood. The flood could have done untold number of geologic features and changes in the Earth's surface. Another thing that they base some of their arguments on concern the presence of oil and coal deposits, which take millions of years to form. The most popular theory on the formation of coal is known as the peat bog theory. Probably no theory is more popular than the peat bog theory on the formation of coal, which tells us that in these various swamps, bogs in the swamps throughout the world, vegetation was laid down from the cypress, the dead limbs and leaves falling out of the cypress trees, and all of the marshy plants that are growing there over a process of millions and millions of years. These were all laid down and compacted, and more laid down and compacted, and pretty soon you had so much pressure there that you formed a seam of coal. The problem with the peat bog theory is that a good, reasonable seam of coal is somewhere between 30 and 40 feet thick. Now that's 30 and 40 feet thick of solid coal. And in order to get a seam of coal that's about 40 feet thick, you have to have untold multiplied thousands of feet of vegetation laid down in order to get that. In other words, 1 foot of vegetation compacted does not equal 1 foot of coal. 1 foot of coal may take 10,000 feet of vegetation compacted together. And the Dismal Swamp in Virginia is a good place to investigate. How many feet of peat bog do they have there? For as long as they've been watching, 7 feet. That won't even form an inch of coal. So that's why they say you're going to need about 5 billion years laying all of this vegetation down to get a seam of coal that's 40 feet thick. The same is true with the oil deposits. This took pressure and heat internalized inside the Earth's crust over a process of millions and billions of years in order to form. What were our answers to that? Well, we go back to the flood again and the burial of untold millions, perhaps billions, of animals as well as plants and trees. The former of those forming our oil and petroleum deposits, the latter forming our coal deposits. As we said earlier, you're pumping dinosaurs into the gas tank. That's right, you're pumping Cro-Magnon Neanderthal into the gas tank. You really got a man in there. Perhaps really what happens is he sticks his legs out the bottom of the car and helps carry you along. Because that's who you're putting in your tank. That's right. Now, I know that's gruesome to some people, but you're sticking a lot of these Cro-Magnon men in your tank, and they're getting us to places like we got to church tonight. You couldn't have gotten here without a Cro-Magnon carrying you along. Coal deposits, at least we agree with the scientists, or I should say at least they agree with us, since we're the ones right, not them. Here are these coal deposits in certain places, and these places that we're finding coal, like in Pennsylvania and like in Kentucky, don't even have any swamps there. The place you find peat is in bogs, and where you find bogs are in swamps. And Pennsylvania and Kentucky, who's ever heard of a dismal swamp in Kentucky? You've got rolling bluegrass hills in Kentucky. And of course we get a lot of our coal from Ohio and from Pennsylvania and from New York. You don't have the swamps like you have down in the more tropical areas of the world. You don't even have any there. And yet they're all found in these one place. And we don't find any coal underneath the Dismal Swamp. They would say it's only been there in existence for several thousand years. Well, how did it get there then? They never can answer the questions. One say, try to give us an answer to the first one. Then all that does is bring up more questions to my mind. If they can answer one question, then it brings up 2 more to your mind. And then, of course, they're at loss for trying to answer that. Another geologic chronometer is the fossiliferous record. Our contention is that there is no mass fossilization occurring anywhere at any time on this planet today. There's no mass fossilization occurring anywhere. And that includes the interesting marine phenomenon that I don't think we've mentioned before, known as water bloom. We'll go ahead and get this in a message just to make sure the record's complete. A marine phenomenon known as water bloom, which is the explosive production of planktonic organisms. Plankton is floating animal and vegetable material in the oceans and in the seas. And a water bloom, which occurs not frequently all over the earth. Of course, it has to occur wherever there's a body of water, a sea or an ocean. It has to occur in salt water. You've got an explosive production of planktonic organisms in salt water that does a whole lot of things to the water as well as to the fish that happen to be nearby. This, by the way, is one of the methods used by the critics to explain away at least one of those great strokes in Egypt. Remember whenever Moses turned the Nile, what color did he turn the Nile? Red, because it said it turned to blood there. Well, what happens in water bloom, if you've ever wondered, by the way, where the Alabama football team got its name, Alabama Crimson Tide, Ever wondered where in the world do you get a name for a football team like Crimson Tide? You know, they're not that far away. University of Alabama's in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. That's not far from Mobile, which is down there on the Gulf. Well, whenever a water bloom takes place, it discolors the water and gives it a reddish tint. And they say this is what happened to the Nile. Water bloom happened in the Nile, and it gave all the water a reddish tint because you have an explosive production of planktonic organisms. Of course, our question is, how did Moses just happen to speak it right before it's fixing to happen then? And then all of a sudden, water bloom happens, and so forth. Then you've got at least one explanation of one of the strokes or plagues or miracles upon the Egyptians. One of the things that water bloom does, that why we're including it here under the study of fossils, is it takes all the oxygen out of the water in its immediate presence. Of course, what that will do will kill all the fish there. Now, you remember earlier we said that when we were talking about fish, that we don't find fossils at the bottom of the ocean. Remember, one of the important reasons we gave you why we don't is because of the existence of predators. Predators come along and pick everything clean before you have time to have any type of fossil form.
For the continuation of this message, please.
Said that when we were talking about fish, that we don't find fossils at the bottom of the ocean. Remember, one of the important reasons we gave you why we don't is because of the existence of predators. Predators come along and pick everything clean before you have time to have any type of fossil form. So the help that water bloom gives is that when water bloom takes place, not only does it destroy the non-predators, it destroys the predators as well. So therefore, some Christian geologists in this particular area will say water bloom does cause mass fossilization because it kills the predators that would otherwise eat up the bodies there, thereby destroying any hope of fossilization. But even though water bloom does take place in different places of the world, no fossilization occurs afterwards. You still simply have the predators eating the remains after a period of time. I mean, that particular area there is not going to forever be absent of oxygen in the water. It's going to take time for oxygen to come back. And besides that, the processes of decay will still begin to work and set into the remains, to the bones, or whatever of the animals, and thereby completely destroying them, so there's nothing left for fossils to form in. Remember, fossils have to form in some type of sedimentary rock, and so a lot of places where water bloom occurs, this wouldn't work anyway. Another area that they use, petrified wood. They really can't explain petrified wood. It's very difficult for anyone really to explain petrified wood, but they say since we know at one time was wood and now it's a stone, we'll take a wild guess that it took several million years to turn from a piece of wood to a stone. So again, it's one of the things that support their 5 billion year mark for the age of the earth. Now, the two final things we haven't discussed before that we need to look at because they are some arguments used in this area. And one of these concerns the coral formations that are seen in the oceans of the world. Coral formations, they're formed by the skeletal carbon calcium remains of invertebrate organisms, which we know as coral. They're little animal type things that have little feelers and little crawlers and little legs and hard little shells. And once the coral dies, then the shell, which is a calcium carbonate remain, stays there. They are compacted together. One grows upon another, upon another, upon another, and pretty soon you have a whole coral formation. However, it takes some time in order for this to occur. There are a couple of different types of coral structures. One is known as the atolls, A-T-O-L-L. Atolls are found only in the Pacific Ocean, in the South Pacific Ocean, where the little coral animals have formed upon and then died upon the sunken cone of an extinct volcano, which in other words would make it a little circle there. You would have a hole in the center and you'd have a little circle. You've probably seen pictures of these before where it's not like an island, it's just a little circle is all you have, and there's nothing, there's water in the middle and water all around it. And what has formed that is the calcium skeletal carbonate remains of coral animals, and they formed what we call an atoll. Another example are known as the barrier reefs. The most famous of these being the Great Barrier Reef, which is the largest structure that has ever been made by a living organism, by man, animals, plants. It's the largest thing that's ever been made by a living organism, the Great Barrier Reef, which stretches for 1,250 miles along the northeastern shore of the continent of Australia. Now, to help you understand this better, you have to picture thousands upon thousands of these coral animals living in one area and then dying one generation upon top of another. They seem to live, for the most part, in the same area, at least in colonies with one another. And they begin, as they die, of course, they're going to fall down to the ocean floor, and as more die on top of them, I mean, they're small, so it's not like you've got one there and then another one happens to just die and fall right on top of him. They die by the hundreds of thousands and just cover the ocean floor. 80 square miles is what this adds up to. Although it stretches, it's a narrow band for 1,200 and around 50 miles along the northeastern shore of the continent of Australia. They die by the hundreds of thousands and fall upon each other, and then more fall upon each other, and they leave a calcium carbonate skeletal remain that becomes just as hard as a rock. Captain James Cook was the first one to really discover the Great Barrier Reef, and many ships have been wrecked on it since then. You don't want to run into a coral reef because it'll destroy your boat. And so, over the process of 5 billion years, or however long coral animals have been around, they've been dying in that area, falling upon each other, leaving a skeletal calcium carbonate remain, and growing slowly upward from the bottom of the ocean floor. Most authorities estimate that they grow somewhere on the average of 0.1 centimeters per year. Now, to get from the bottom of the ocean floor, and see there some of them are all the way up visible now. They're up above the surface of the water. And that may be, 20 feet or something. When you get near shore, it may be 20 feet or 30 feet. 1 centimeter, or 0.1 centimeter, 0.1 centimeter per year. It's going to take an awful long time to reach 20 feet. But that's just the view of some authorities. Other authorities, which noticed back in around 1883, after the explosion of Krakatoa, formation of a new coral reef near Indonesia, that this coral reef was growing as fast as 4 centimeters per year. Now that is just many times more than what most people are saying, 1/10 of a centimeter as compared to 4 centimeters per year. Now, if we go back far enough, back to the time of the flood, you have to keep in mind the fact that the flood did so many different things, there's really no way of telling what was the rate of death falling upon and thereafter formation of reefs back then. Just because it's 4 centimeters per year now doesn't mean it's always been 4 centimeters per year. And especially with the destruction that would have been wrought during the flood. Maybe it just piled all of them on top of each other in certain areas, randomly so, but in certain areas, and thereby would have ended up with around 20 feet. You see, you've got to remember that each one of these chronometers that we're giving from the scientific point of view is very, very important, because these coral reefs are not man-made. Someone just hasn't gone out there and dumped a lot of coral there. These are millions of these little animals that have died there. So how are you going to explain that many of them that stack up on top of each other and end up 20 feet thick and end up so hard you can wreck a ship on one of those things? Unless you've got an Earth that's been here for 5 billion years. Unless you've got enough time for these things to die and fall up on top of each other. Whether it's a barrier reef, whether it's an atoll, whether it's some other type of coral formation, and there are many types of coral formations, they still evidently were formed sometime around the flood, and they had something to do with the flood. Now, perhaps some of the smaller atolls, some of these smaller reefs, such as the one formed after the explosion of Krakatoa, could have been formed recently, but still they don't grow 20 feet, though. They're still very, very small. They generally grow this type, the barrier reef, up near the shoreline of a continent or of an island or of a country or something like that. Therefore, even if they are only 4 centimeters, they're not very far under the water, and you can dive down there and find them and measure how rapidly they're growing. But it's no argument if we take ourselves back to the time of the flood and assume that things probably, no doubt, definitely were quite a bit different then than they are today. Another chronometer is the subject of the formations found in caves, generally referred to as stalactites and stalagmites. The best way to remember which is which is a little saying you'll be told if you ever go exploring caves, is that if you don't hold tight, then you might fall. Thereby meaning that these stalactites grow from the ceiling downwardly, and the stalagmites grow from the floor upwardly. You know, you've seen these things in caves, these, like icicles hanging down and ones growing up. Stalactites grow down, stalagmites grow up. If you don't hold tight, you might fall. So that's a cute way to remember which is a stalactite and which is a stalagmite. Spells similar, one has a C and one has a G, but anyway, they're similar formation. How are they formed? They're formed by the evaporation of lime-bearing water in caves, leaving a limey substance behind that forms this cone or spike or something that looks like an icicle. If you've ever been in caves, we explored some not too long ago over in Wisconsin. Take a little tour through the caves, and these things are tremendous. Some of them are, just that big, and some of them are taller than a man. They're huge things that grow up. And sometimes you can get them connect. You get the stalactite to connect with the stalagmite. And then you've got a huge formation. And it's just that slow dripping of water and the evaporation of the water that's there and the deposition of that lime substance behind it. And you've got just those tiny, tiny drops of water. That must take millions and millions of years. Well, this is one of the greatest arguments they have. How can we explain that? Well, let me give you a couple of modern-day examples of rapid formation of stalactites and stalagmites. You won't ever explore a cave and have someone tell you anything differently than what I've just said, because that is the belief. And they pride themselves on showing you that this cave has been here, 2 million years. We can tell by how long this stalagmite or this stalactite is. And they like, the bigger caves have the bigger formations there, and therefore the bigger population, whether it's Mammoth Cave in Kentucky or Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico. You'll get tourists from all over the world visiting there because of these unusual formations. And it takes millions and millions of years in order to get that way. Let me give you an exception concerning a stalagmite. This is a picture I will show you here in a moment from National Geographic magazine, October 1953. You'll see a picture of a dead bat that's entombed in a stalagmite. And of course, what you get right away is the fact that that stalagmite formed so quickly that the bacterial decay factor as well as the predator factor didn't even have time to set in. It caught him so fast, no one had time to eat him. Nor did he even have time to decay. Now, if we've got one exception, then that ought to put some questions in your mind right away. This is taken 30 years ago, this picture here, reproduced in National Geographic magazine. You've got a scientist there looking at that bat. You can see the conical shape of the cave formation there. Now, if it takes millions of years, he would have decayed before he ever got the first drop of water on him. Or something or someone would have eaten him, whether a Cro-Magnon man living down there with him or some other flesh-eating bat that would have come along and gotten him. But evidently, that thing formed so fast, bacterial decay factor didn't figure in, neither did the factor of the predators. Then, to give you an example of a stalactite, you realize that a whole series of these, forming more or less a curtain, grow beneath Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. Here's a picture of some of these. Let's see. Lincoln Memorial was built in 1923. This picture was taken in 1968. Therefore, it only took 45 years for these formations to, some of them exceed 5 feet in length. This is under Lincoln Memorial. They're not icicles down there. These are stalactites down there, hanging like a whole curtain from underneath Lincoln Memorial in D.C. Took 45 years for them to grow 5 feet long. And they're trying to pass off on us that it takes millions of years for them to grow. So remember these two exceptions to the scientific fact of history, so they say. 5 feet in 45 years. I can imagine in several thousand years how you could end up with these huge structures that you see in Carlsbad Caverns. By the way, I believe the bat was probably in Carlsbad. The stalagmite that I showed you, the picture of the stalagmite with the bat, was found in Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico. And of course, Carlsbad has been there for untold millions of years. That's how long it took to form. But this really punctures that balloon when right in your most famous cavern. That's probably the most famous series of caverns in the United States, second only to Mammoth Cave in Kentucky. And right in your most famous and your oldest group of caverns, you find a bat that is living on top of one of these things that forms so quickly no one can get to him. Now, you're not going to see that in many scientific journals. National Geographic just prints up everything, as you know. They're not, I mean, they're sure, I believe they're evolutionary in their beliefs, but they'll print up anything. You find them something that's unusual, and they'll print it up in there. And that upsets a lot of scientists. You know, here's a bat that really hurts our theory. And more things than that have been found. That's just 2 exceptions. But 2 is enough to break down the rule that it takes millions of years. 5-foot-long stalactites from Lincoln Memorial, the ceiling underneath the ground level of Lincoln Memorial. And only took 45 years for them to form. Well, that's some of their chronometers, none of which work. I want to leave you with a couple of problems with scientific views, neither of which they can really answer satisfactorily. One of these concerns the lack of sufficient levels of meteoritic dust on the surface of the earth. Dust from meteorites that enter the Earth's atmosphere is falling to the earth all the time. As a matter of fact, it's estimated that around 14.3 million tons of meteoritic dust settles to the earth every year. 14.3 million tons. Now that's not just a whole lot. I mean, and after all, we're talking about dust. And 14 tons of dust, you could scatter that over Sahara Desert so you could never find it. Not even with a team of these educated scientists. However, after 5 billion years, that's another thing now. When you start dumping 14.3 million tons of dust on the earth every year for 5 billion years, well, you end up with a 54-foot layer. That means we'd be walking around in dust, we'd be living underground. You'd have a 54-foot layer of compacted meteoritic dust covering the whole earth. And of course, we don't have anything like that, not even an inch of meteoritic dust. Some of it's found at the ocean, in the bottom of the ocean, and that's only because whatever does fall on the earth, and we see 14.3 million tons does settle somewhere on the earth every year, sooner or later it's going to be washed into the ocean. So certainly the floor, the bottom of the oceans have a lot more meteoritic dust than does the surface of the earth. But it doesn't have 54 feet worth, though. It doesn't have a 54-foot layer of nothing but dust down there at the bottom. This is something they can't answer. A second thing that is pretty difficult is known as dendrochronology, the study of the age of trees by means of the rings that you find in trees. I guess you know from Sunday school that you can find out how old a tree is by counting the rings in it. And that's reliable. 5-year-old tree is going to have 5 rings in it because it grows a certain amount every year, and you can see that mark there every year. So let me give you some statistics concerning dendrochronology that are very interesting in light of what our beliefs are concerning the date of creation as well as concerning the date of the flood. In the first place, scientists will certainly agree with us that the oldest living things are trees. There's nothing alive today that's any older than the oldest trees in the world. The giant redwoods and sequoias in California are very, very old, the latter sometimes reaching almost 4,000 years of age, the sequoias over the redwoods. I'm talking about one tree now being 4,000 years old. And that's been proven by the fact that when a storm takes one of them over, all you got to do is count the rings inside that tree. Now, you might have a base that's 34 feet around. It's going to take you a while to count 4,000 rings, but they're there. And that means that tree's been around 4,000 years. These trees, so the scientists tell us, or the dendrochronologists inform us, are completely immune to pests and to disease. No pest and no disease can destroy a sequoia tree, which in other words means they, practically speaking, will live forever. There's nothing that can destroy it outside of natural catastrophes, lightning, fire, maybe a terrific storm, something like that, or of course modern man cutting one of them down to build a whole subdivision or two worth of houses out of one tree. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, that saves a lot of going up into Washington and filling all those trucks up by means of helicopters, carrying those logs out of places that no trucks can get into. Just go to California, go to Sequoia National Park, go to Yosemite and cut down one redwood, one sequoia there, and you can probably build a whole subdivision out of one tree. I've got some pictures I can prove that to be true. Now, the interesting thing is, if, according to their own statistics, they are immune to pests, they are immune to disease, practically speaking, they can live forever, why aren't there any older than 4,000 years? Why not 1,000,000 years old or 100,000 years? Why that general area there of around 4,000 years? Now here's a picture of one that's over. We were out in California back in the 60s, and I got some pictures here to show you that, to show you the tremendous size. It's a picture of our family, my father standing beside the fallen tree. This is one fallen, by the way, which of course then you could count the rings on it. And he's 6'3", so you can tell how tall the tree is. Probably you can see it first of all from here, and then maybe some of the others of you can see it. Now this is one of the redwoods there. These are tremendous trees. It's a place to go if you ever go to California. This is another picture of one that I've heard since we've been there was taken down by a snowstorm. No wonder that it was taken down. It hardly has anything holding it to the ground, but when we were there it was still up. It was known as the Wawona Tunnel Tree. You can see a sign beside it informing us that it was cut back in 1881. The reason it fell is because it practically doesn't have any of the base of the tree holding itself to the ground because it's large enough for cars to drive through. As a matter of fact, our family's sitting on the back of our old Ford Galaxy 500 driving through the middle of the tree. That's how tremendous these trees are, big enough to cut a hole so a whole car can drive through there. Snowstorm took it down sometime in the 70s. I read in a newspaper. I don't remember what year that was, but it was the Wawona Tunnel Tree, lasted almost 100 years. And you took most of its life away from it by cutting half of the base away, or more than half of the base away. No comments now on myself in that picture because that was many years ago. This is the largest one there, known as the Grizzly Giant. It's got some statistics here in front of it. It's around 4,000 years old. The diameter at the base, 35-foot diameter of the tree at the base. How would you like to be in the cutting wood business and have to cut that tree down? Or cut it up for firewood? Its base is 34 feet. I mean, that's like your house, like cutting through your house or something. The lowest branch, the first branch you can reach as you go up is 100 feet above the ground. And it is 6 feet in diameter. It is just, you can't even see the top of it. When you stand beneath it, it's too high up. I don't mean it goes into the clouds or anything. It's just that it's so high, you've got to be miles away in order to look up and be able to see the top. This is the grizzly giant sequoia tree in Yosemite National Park. However, that's not the end of the subject of trees. The University of Arizona and some scientists there have found trees in the White Mountains of California at the 10,000-foot level, even older than the redwoods and sequoias of Yosemite. They are known as the bristlecone pine trees. The oldest one they have found there is 4,600 years old. 17 of them that they have found are 4,000 years or older. White Mountains, 10,000-foot level, California, bristlecone pine trees, one of them almost 5,000 years old. Now, as I said earlier, they simply can't answer why we don't have any more of these. What about ourselves? What do we have to say about this? Why around that age, 4,000, 5,000 years old? It's interesting that no living thing found is older than a reasonable date for the flood. I mean, if we found something that could be proven by the rings to be 15,000 years old, then we're in trouble. But it's interesting, nothing has been found that can be proven by this method to be any older than a reasonable date for the flood. Now, if we've got one, what did I say, 4,600 years old, that puts us way back before the time of Abraham then. Abraham 2000 BC, we're 2000 AD. That puts it way back a half a millennium before Abraham. That means that bristlecone pine tree began to grow 500 years before Abraham's time. And it's still growing today. They have various ways to look inside the tree without cutting it down naturally to find out how many rings it has. But those that have, been fallen have certainly revealed that they are on the average of 4,000 years old. Now, I can't really say that because we hadn't gotten into our dates on creation and our dates of the flood, but we know, perhaps you at least should know by now, that the flood and creation certainly aren't on the order of hundreds of thousands of years, not even on the order of tens of thousands of years ago. It's interesting that nothing has been found any older than a reasonable date for the flood. Now that does not, of course the flood destroyed everything, destroyed all trees. There were no sequoia trees or bristlecone pine trees that made it through the flood. The flood destroyed everything. This would mean that we would have a date of the flood around 2500 BC. If you assume that shortly after the flood, these trees began to grow and they extended their lifespan from then 4,600 years until now. Now, our problem with that is that, as we will show you in later studies, the date of the flood is most definitely much earlier than 2,500 BC. So how do we explain the fact that we don't have, let's say, trees that are 6,000 years old? Well, again, we have to go back to the unstable atmosphere of the post-diluvian world. Things simply weren't going so that these trees could get a root in the ground and live to be these tremendous ages until the atmosphere settled back down. Remember, with the collapse of the water vapor canopy, the increased radiation, all of these things took time to reach a point of equilibrium and to stabilize in the atmosphere so that everything could more or less get back to normal. Not the pre-flood normal, but at least some semblance of being normal so that things could begin to grow. Therefore, what I'm saying is that trees that began to grow shortly after the flood didn't live for thousands and thousands of years. They would get going and then die, perhaps live 100 years, no one knows. But it wasn't until several thousand years after the flood that this total point of equilibrium and stability was reached, so that these trees, redwoods, sequoias, bristlecone pines, could begin to grow. And they grew from then until now, over 4,000 years. But you see, our point is, if these things are totally immune to everything, then why don't we have some that are millions of years old? Sure, lightning could have struck one here and a snowstorm could have blown one over there, but why not just one somewhere that's over 5,000 years? It puts it on this side of the flood within a reasonable territory and boundary of time. It's not unreasonable at all that we've got trees that are 4,600 years old. If we had trees that were 10,000 years old, that's another problem. But it's not a problem because they don't exist. They only reach back to several thousand years, probably after the flood. Now, in both of these areas, the meteoritic dust, the dendrochronology, they're very difficult, very, very difficult for the scientists to explain. They realize that dust, 14.3 million tons, is falling to the Earth's surface. And it's not all going to the bottom of the ocean, or 54-foot layer would be there. So how can the Earth have been here for 5 billion years? And most scientists, I need to add this in on that point, most scientists believe that many more meteorites hit the Earth in the past than do today. That means even more dust back then. It's not like the rate has been constant or the rate has been going down or going up. The rate's been going down, according to scientists. I'm not saying whether that's true or not. I'm just saying according to them. They believe that meteorites in the past were much more numerous and much more plentiful. So we don't have enough dust, and we don't have trees that are old enough to reach back to a period prior to what we would consider a reasonable date for the flood.